Hey, Christian,
Yes.
did you prepare any good jokes? Because I teased in my invite on LinkedIn. I said that your true calling was stand-up comedy. Did you prepare
I
anything for our good
I
audience today or not?
I have only prepared disappointment in that regard. I heard a rumor that you said that, and I should have probably taken the cue,
You
but
should have at least got some material ready to go for an opening monologue to give these good folks something to listen to.
well, that now our participants now can realize that if there's anything entertaining, it was not premeditated. It was all
We're also going to start hearing that ding, ding, ding as everybody exits, when they realize
that's
that
yeah.
the show is not what we promised.
I do have a dad joke alert that is supposed to coach me back into safe territory. All right. I think we've got a group here. We'll have, I'm sure, a few folks joining, but we want to be respectful of everyone's time and get started. My name is Christian Nielson. I'm part of the DecisionWise leadership team and also an organizational development consultant. I'm joined by DecisionWise president Matt Wride.
Welcome to our audience, and it's great to be with you, Christian.
Yeah, this is something Matt and I are very passionate about. We're excited to dive in here. And spoiler alert, I probably have too many slides for what we're going to talk about. So there might be a few that we fast forward to, but we'll keep an eye on that chat function. So please, if you've got questions, comments, feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll make sure we're responding there. All right. So our topic today, using data to improve the employee experience. We've played with a few different topics for today, data over dogma, but using data to make better decisions is really what we're talking about today. And especially as those decisions impact the employee experience, which is what we at DecisionWise are very, very passionate about. So we've got some interesting content, some models and frameworks I think that will be useful for our audience. Things that have really helped us as we've worked with our clients to understand and improve their employee experience, but also how to bring data to the forefront and for them to use in the management of their business and management of their employee experience. So I've got some quotes just to prime the conversation to kind of warm us up. Where there is data smoke, there is business fire. I like that quote a lot. I tried to grab some obscure ones, mostly just to surprise Matt with quotes that maybe he hasn't heard, but he's probably heard some of these. But I do like that. Anything that gives us an advance warning of potential problems is of immense value to our org. And so we want to make sure we're utilizing that. Most of the world will make decisions by either guessing or using their gut. They will either be lucky or wrong. Many of us, myself included, many times have been just lucky, and it looks like I'm smart after the fact if I've inadvertently made the right decision. But data can help us take luck out of the equation.
And that's what we mean by dogma. Sometimes we have dogma, which can be great. Principles that are proven to be reliable in the past. We're not throwing those out, but sometimes we just do things because that's the way we've always done them. And that is a form of using your gut in a way. It's not evidence-based. In medicine in particular, we try to make evidence-based decisions, and that principle should apply in management, that we use to the extent possible evidence to try, or data to try to minimize risk. So that's what we're driving at today, is even in managing people, it's not about the tricks or tips that you've heard. It's about you can approach it from a data-driven mindset.
I love that. I love that. Let's get a few more. I may have put too many quotes in here. Yeah, in a world of more data, the companies with more data literate people are the ones that are going to win. And that's partly what we're here to talk about. How can we build more literacy within data for ourselves and also within our organization so that we're using this. In fact, in a moment, we'll talk about not only routing the right data to the right people, but I might even add, after you've routed the data to the right people, you've got to remind them that they have it, because I think a lot of times we forget we have this data at our disposal to help us make better decisions. And then I think the last quote for a moment from Brene Brown, maybe stories are just data with a soul. I like that, the power of using data in our decision making, a lot of times it requires weaving it into a story or understanding the story behind the data or deriving the story from the data. But I do like this quote. So
there's
yeah.
a way of thinking about it called data journalism, that if we think of us as data journalists, we use the data to then compose the story. So I like sometimes reminding everyone to think about, sometimes it's not data exploration, it's not data analytics per se. At the end of the day, it's data journalism, telling the compelling story, because as humans, we change and connect with stories. We change because of and connect with stories. So
Interesting and not planned, and also hashtag not sponsored. It just as you said that the book on my table is data story. So something we care a lot about, and also data that just sits there that isn't compelling, that doesn't add up to a compelling story, doesn't really serve us. So let's go further. Those of you who've been on these webinars before, these next slides might be familiar, but it's helpful just to set the ground, the groundwork, so that we're all kind of speaking about the same thing here. We'd like to just kind of introduce some definitions. Let's talk culture, employee experience, and employee engagement, because it helps if we're all speaking the same language on this. So culture, a robust definition of this, or a longer definition, would be a set of values, norms, guiding beliefs, and understandings that is shared by members of an organization and is taught to new members as a way to feel, think, and behave. It's everything about the organization interlocks to form the culture, not only to form it, but to reinforce it, which is why culture can be difficult to change. But I love this definition, Matt, and I think you helped shape this. I like that it stresses that it's taught to new members as a way to think, feel, and behave. And it's kind of the shorthand for our definition of culture is the way we do things around here. When you join an organization, very quickly you start to pick up on the way we do things around here. Example I use, I one time previously worked in healthcare settings. Very quickly I learned which meetings you start to wear ties to, just by looking around. Am I the only one not wearing a tie? It seems like another age when I was wearing a tie, but the way we do things right here. So that's culture. You notice that we have a world in this little icon here. If we add people to that world we've created, to the way we do things around here, they're going to experience that world. That's what we're talking about, the employee experience, the sum of perceptions employees have about their interactions with the organization in which they work, or how we experience the culture. Once we add people, that their experience with that culture or the way we do things around here adds up to their employee experience. And that's where it's nice to make the distinction between culture and employee experience, because it really opens up where we can have an impact, where we can take action.
Well, not everybody experiences the culture, embraces it, thrives in it to the same way. And when we talk about experience, we're acknowledging those differences and telling leaders, you've got to be worried about the experience, not only what it is about what it's like at your organization, but then how does that fit to each of the people that you manage and lead? That's really why it's important to make the distinction between experience and culture.
Love that. I love that. And then the last of our definitions, I gave a kind of a presentation on a similar topic last week, and I made the joke, what if my whole presentation was just glossary? What if this whole webinar was just definitions? It is not. This is the last one. Employee engagement, an emotional state where we feel passionate, energetic, and committed to our work. Toward our work, in turn, we fully invest our best selves in the work that we do. And this is in many ways a response to the employee experience. In fact, I'm going to speak about kind of that relationship here in a moment, but it's based on what I bring to the work, my own background, my own experiences, my values, what I'm looking for out of a workplace experience. When that meets the experience that the organization is providing, that determines the level I'm going to engage, how much I choose to bring of my best self to that role, and our response there. So these three things, we didn't want just to define them, but we also wanted to show the interlinkages here that between these three. The culture is definitely, the culture informs the employee experience, which dictates how much people are going to engage in the work experience. And this is an important truth that I've learned in doing this work. And that is, you can't build employee engagement, not directly. I never paused too long there because I didn't want you to feel like there's no hope. And also, most of the last 10 years of my work experience has been spent trying to improve employee engagement. It can be done, but it's important to recognize that you're not improving engagement because people get to choose if they engage. You're strengthening the invitation to engage by building a stronger employee experience. So we're going to be talking about data, but a lot of it's going to be steered around two questions. What experience are we creating for our employees, and is it the right experience? And we want to talk about how we use data to answer both those questions, but we also want to discuss how we use data to make better decisions in general, and to use those the data that we have to not just go by gut, so we can use take some of the risk out of our decisions. So a few more concepts that are helpful as we start to dissect what experience are we creating and is it the right one. You know, that definition of employee experience talked about the sum of perceptions. Well, a lot of what adds up to our employee experience are these moments of truth. And we like to use these concepts as Chronos and Kairos. Again, we have introduced these in other webinars, but I think it bears repeating and also sets the stage for where we're headed. But Chronos and Kairos, they're two terms from ancient Greece that were used to talk about time. Now, Chronos refers to chronological time, these moments that can be planned, predetermined points in time. So chronological time, seconds, minutes, hours, the things that we can understand and predict. And we use that to talk about the employee experience, these planned moments, the life cycle moments. You know, we know someone's going to be hired. We know they're eventually going to leave our organization. And in between there are some things that we can expect to happen. We expect an onboarding experience. We expect different training activities, anniversaries, performance reviews, promotions. And these are important because if we can expect them, we can study them, we can plan for them, we can script the experience we want to create in those moments. And that's an important part of employee experience.
And as we think about data, we've gotten much better over the last 4 years or so in grabbing data from these Chronos moments, from onboarding, exits, and we're using those. And what we need to do is get that information back to operational leaders faster, but probably more curate it better, get it more organized, and get it back to our operational leaders so they can do something with it. It's certainly, I agree. The great thing about differentiating between Chronos and Kairos, which we'll get to, is it allows us to match our data to the events that we care about. It gives us a structure as we think about gathering data.
And excellent points. And another key consideration is when we're trying to understand employee experience or gather employee feedback, it's different than customer data. Customer data, you can look at different things in the way they're interacting with your website or your products or transactions at cash registers and service points and things like that. Customer experience, employee experience data, we want to be very careful about how we're tapping into their feedback at key moments that don't seem cumbersome, that don't disrupt the flow of work too much. And these Chronos moments are logical points to ask, how was this? What did that feel like? And ask some really nice, carefully curated survey items there. Kairos, but before we get into Kairos, we want to talk about this concept of VUCA. VUCA, of course, is Spanish for cow. Just kidding. That joke didn't play last time, and I still said it again.
Yeah, it didn't work.
That is VUCA. VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So this is why we can't only rely on Chronos, because there are things we can't plan on. I guarantee whoever was in charge of trains this day wasn't planning on this happening out a second story window. But it's important to recognize and appreciate and just own that there are things that are going to happen that we can't plan on. For example, in 2018, I didn't have a lot of clients talking about a mass and immediate move to remote work. But boy, that changed as we progressed a couple of years later and the pandemic happened. There are things that aren't in our control to script, plan out, and kind of legislate the experience we want to create for people. And that's okay, but we need to recognize that creates kind of these other moments, these Kairos moments, the unplanned moments. And this term comes from the concept of the right moment. and it's more focused on how we get it in these unscripted moments or these unplanned moments and moments of truth that are inherently unpredictable. And I love this part, tend to reveal the underlying values and culture of the organization. If you can't script it, if it's not a very deliberate, such as an onboarding exercise or checklist that you're implementing, if you can't script a moment, you better hope that you've got your values and your culture dialed in so that we get it right. And here's what that looks like. This is a very scientific line that our colleague Dave Long drew and we've been using for a while. But these are just examples of Kairos moments, mistakes, workplace conflict, lifestyle challenges or changes or failures, personal issues, personal health crises, whether it's you or a family member, if that takes over and suddenly one day you find out someone in your family has a terminal illness, you have to show up to work the next day, what's your supervisor going to say to you? How do your coworkers treat you? How does that, where do you maybe need to be flexible with some of the benefits in the organization to allow for some humanity when someone's going through some crisis? And does your culture help fill in the gaps so that people know how to act when you're going off road here?
And you would think based on that graphic in front of you that you can't measure it, that you can't measure the messiness. But the reality is we see it as we do pulse surveys, we gather information that tells us trends. But a really important way that we measure this sort of messy point is how well are our leaders serving the needs of their teams through, for example, 360 data that we bring in that can tell us leadership effectiveness. And so it's not like we can't measure this too. And in fact, we do have ways and tools that do that. And so you need to think about both the planned moments and the unplanned moments and realize that both can be effectively measured.
Love that. And going back to our two big questions, what experience are we creating and is it the right one? Looking at your Chronos moments and also looking for evidence that you're getting it right in the Kairos moments. When, if these things are happening or when they're happening, and obviously this is not exhaustive list.
A nice example is exit interviews. If you've got good exit interviews, you're going to find a few of these where you're going to learn that this wasn't handled really well, or there was just a blow up. And you can gather enough of those to see trends.
Yeah.
That's the power of data.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So groundwork laid. We want to talk a little bit about diving more purely in on data and how to think about data and start to deploying that in your organization. For especially on the people side. So I want to break this part of the conversation into two components. One, I have this concept around going deep with employee experience data. If you've got the resources and the political will inside the organization to do it, there's some amazing things that are possible if you can build your own data science team around your people experience. Now that I also wanted to recognize that that's not an option for most organizations. Very few of our clients can go all the way with that. But that's not a reason not to go down the path of using data for shaping the employee experience. We can get a lot of the values with some simplified metrics so I want to spend some time on employee experience data for the rest of us. So we'll go deep and then we'll go kind of more broad. So going deep, this next slide shouldn't be too big of a surprise. If you want to go deep with employee experience data, you're going to need some data. Spoiler alert. So, and there's different ways to think of this. I borrowed this framework from another organization that wasn't applying it to people analytics, but I think it painted this part of the conversation really well. If we want to talk about, well, how much data are we going to need? Well, it depends on what you want to accomplish. If you don't want any analytics, then you don't need much data. And everything can be a fun surprise for you. You don't need much data. Now, that's not most of us. At a minimum, we want to understand what's happening at our organization. An example I use, October turnover. Was it higher or lower than September? What are we seeing? Are we losing people? Or some other metric? But we need some data if we want some descriptive analytics around what happened. If we want to go a little further and understand why it happened, we need more data. If we want to get into diagnostic, not only how turnover was in October, but why did people leave? What changed? What is influencing departure there? And if we want to go further, predictive analytics. Well, what's going to happen in December? What will happen? Can we predict? You're going to need more data to get to that level. And then if we want to be more influential and have more causative or causal relationships and understanding and insights around prescriptive analytics, how to make something happen, we need a bit more data.
The last one, prescriptive analytics, is a really good example where we finally get to the point where we can measure fit. And I'm not talking about cultural fit, which is just a question of, hey, is this a cool person that I'd like to get a beer with?
Right.
I'm talking about fit where their skill set, maybe what they bring to the table is going to align with that they're not just the org, but even to the team level. And with analytics, we can get better at matching people to environments. We're
Yeah.
not there yet, and that's well in the future, but we're starting that work now.
I love that. Yeah, there's some exciting things on the horizon, especially as some of the tools that are more advanced become very accessible to even very small orgs. Some machine learning, AI, and some interesting things are becoming available and much easier to implement, which is scary and exciting, depending on how those tools are used. But years ago, when our clients shifted from just wanting survey data to wanting more advanced people analytics, I realized that I needed a better way to understand and categorize data so that I could a better framework for thinking about, okay, well, what data is out there? How do I use it? How do I think about it? And so we created this simple model around people analytics categories. So there's a few here. The first one we'll talk about is demographic data. And this is data that describes your employee population. And you've got this already as to certain extents and different levels of completeness in your HRIS. You've got, if you've got birth date, age. If you've got hire date, tenure. You probably have data on position or maybe even time in position, which is even more useful. Ethnicity, gender, educational background. You might have manager, non-manager, union, non-union, anything you're tracking, exempt, non-exempt, anything you're tracking that describes your employee population, these characteristics. And a lot of this data, by the way, is easiest to capture when you hire someone. But it can also be updated through follow-up exercises. A lot of our clients, it's been really interesting is so DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion efforts have always been a core component of our assessment instruments and our consulting approach, but they really came to the forefront in the last couple of years as more and more organizations realized that it was an important part of the conversation and they needed to be more informed. And so a lot of our clients, if they didn't have ethnicity data, for example, they had to go back to their employee population and try to capture that. And it's much cleaner to get as you onboard or bring people in. Sometimes it's also interesting if you have M&A activity, a company comes in, they might have been tracking different demographics, and some merged data sets can be a little bit require some thought and effort.
A lot of times, because this data is actually somewhat readily accessible, you can go to an HRIS system. It feels like this work is kind of done, but the reality is we're not doing as much as we could, and there's a lot of room for growth just in this area. I don't think we're doing a good enough getting top leaders seeing trends as far as ages and tenure. I think who we promote and how we promote them and at what times we promote them, all of that can come from demographic data. I'm not sure most organizations are really, and so while and let me finish that thought. I don't think they're doing what they can with it, and
Yeah.
so while it feels like we kind of have this under control, well, I know what that is and I know where to find it. That's not the same thing as actually actively using it and routing it and curating it and getting it to the right people. We know that our senior leaders actually don't have a very good feel for how the organization's tenure and age stack up and how that may have changed over the last 2 to 3 years. As we visit with clients, Christian, we know they're not seeing that. It may be obvious to people in HR or HR business partners, but it's not, and it needs to get consolidated and distributed more. So just something to think about is this is not just a passover or flyover demographic. Or data point. It's something you got to work on.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I have been guilty of saying, oh yeah, we got that, let's move on. And there's more exciting data to be had, but there's some really useful low-hanging fruit here. And the more of this you have, it magnifies the power of these other data sets I'm about to describe. So, for example, turnover. Well, if you can describe and recognize population trends and who's leaving, that's much better than just knowing how many people have left. Is it certain age? Is it, are we seeing gender patterns in our departure or some other factor? So the demographic data really amplifies and magnifies the power of all these other data sets. And the first one is especially where Matt and I live, with employee experience data. And this is around those Chronos and Kairos moments, but also the employee experience at large. What are the perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs of employees? How are they experiencing the culture? And we're really trying to find those natural points to tap in, understand their experience, catalog that, and then marry that with demographic data so that it's can provide some insight and value. Some examples of this are going to be onboarding exit anniversary survey results, tapping into those key moments. You might be doing things around promotions and other things to try to understand. A lot of trainings and formal L&D efforts have kind of post-class feedback and other things to try to measure what their experience was there. Engagement surveys, these broad employee life cycle, employee experience anchor surveys, we often call them. We're big believers in those. We've seen popular taste kind of ebb and flow around these big surveys. Sometimes people want more always on. Time and time again, we see the market come back to these big engagement surveys because there's value in having a broad metric. There's also value in having kind of a shared snapshot in time understanding of the experience and a starting line for taking action. But those can be a wealth of information, especially because if you do it once a year, you can usually ask more items in those surveys. 360 feedback data, Matt mentioned this. This is a great way to understand, take that question I introduced earlier and apply it to an individual. What experience is this leader creating for those around them? And also it's a way to see if our values and our culture is being lived by a certain individual in a way that's useful for us. And I say individual, but we also aggregate 360 data. So even though it's often seen as an individual development exercise, the aggregate data from 360 feedback can be a really useful data set. What are our leaders struggling with across different competency areas? Is innovation a key component of our strategy, but our leaders, a part of our business are struggling with that? That's useful information. And let's jump into this next category. This is outcome data. And this is where I would say most of the work we do with clients would be in those green triangles, demographic and employee experience data. But we're always begging them to bring more of their outcome data into the conversation because it unlocks a lot of possibilities. It's also where the rest of the business starts to pay more attention, because outcome data is any operational outcomes that are tracked by the organization. If we're trying to understand how does the employee experience or aspects of the employee's experience impact what's happening in our business? And that could be, HR related outcomes like turnover, or we might even call engagement an outcome. It could also be things like production numbers, sales, expenses, safety events, turnover, customer satisfaction. So if we understand kind of these demographic data, outcome data, and employee experience data, we can start to unlock this top category, which would be around insights and predictions.
I want to share with you an example of that where sometimes it's hard to get that outcome data. So large healthcare organization, health system that we work with, we wanted to understand the association or the relationship between how often was someone meeting with their leader and then the perceptions of the employee about the organization and about their overall levels of engagement. That's an outcome, right? That's actually an operational metric. How often am I meeting with one-on-ones with so we just couldn't get it, so we just asked it. in the survey. So that's not usually a typical question you would ask in a survey where you're soliciting feedback and sentiment, right? Perceptions, attitudes, beliefs are usually the topics that we're kind of covering. But we asked how often, and man, it was so insightful to see that as the frequency in which people were connecting with their direct manager, how that impacted, and the extreme, and I'm going to use the word extreme correlation between engagement and belonging and caring, and just the amount of contact they had. And
Yeah.
so if we can get people to unlock the outcome, sometimes we have to cheat and ask it ourselves, but if we can find it, then we can really start showing some really amazing associations that really can. And then if you talk about creating an incentive for people to get out there and do more one-on-ones, this data certainly helped that. So
Agreed completely. And that's a really good example of what we're talking about. We're really looking for those causal relationships, if this, then that, and trying to understand where do we have some leverage points, and especially where there are very actionable things like the one you described. It's not rocket science to say, hey, better one-on-ones are going to lead to, a better outcome. I mean, it's not like we're saying, hey, you have to invent cold fusion. It's no, you just need to tell your managers how to and motivate them to have these meaningful touch points, and it's going to have a real impact on some important business metrics. That's really what we're trying to do with all of this. Is if we have a nice foundation of data, and by the way, it can't just be, hey, we captured this once in 1955 and we're good. It's got to be actively clean and curated and current. um, but if you've got that, some really interesting things are possible. But you need more than just the data. You need some ability to interact and process and get the value out of it. And so I've got this slide here. So you'll need access to the data, but you'll also need budget and buy-in to a certain extent to if you're going to go make this a mainstay of your practice going forward. That budget is going to be you'll need some data science and stats expertise in-house, if depending on, a lot of our clients leverage our data science team, and we love doing that work, and hope to always be adding that value, especially for our smaller clients that don't have the ability to build these teams in-house. But if you are able to, you'll need to build some internal data science and stats expertise. Now, I would say, and this may prove that I'm bad at stats, but I would say I'm above average at statistics. But I would stop well short of calling myself a data scientist. I know enough to ask the thoughtful questions and to interpret things, but I'm not the one that's using Python or R to actually go do some of the advanced analysis. We need other folks to do that on our team, and we fortunately have some really wonderful, talented individuals that can do that. But you'll need them to help collect, clean, and curate data, analyze data, and identify relationships. They'll need some software suites. Now, these are more accessible than I think they've ever been. For example, R and Python, they're pretty low barriers to entry. Some of the others have some expense to them, but you'll need some technology to be able to process that. And this is an interesting one, Matt. I think you and I both have experienced this, but you'll want a subject matter expert paired with the stats expert.
yeah.
Another way to say that, business leaders can't do it alone, and neither can the data science team. You kind of need to have the back and forth around what are we trying to understand and what outcome are we trying to influence in the business or in the employee experience, and have some collaborative direction assigned.
For sure. And sometimes, I mean, we do a lot of teaching and outreach to obviously HR professionals, talent management professionals. And sometimes I think we make the assumption that all stays in house. But the best practice here is you build a cross-functional team. You're going to have someone who handles IT, someone who's going to handle information security, data science, some operational leaders. You need to go out and build really a cross-functional team to work on this. And you have to, and you need a strategy, not just how we collect it and how often we deliver it, but even things like ethics, like our, what do we collect? How often do we collect it? And are we going to make that transparent to the employee population? And so your cross-functional team is really nicely situated to grapple with those issues. So my main point is this, is if you're an HR leader and you're trying to do this in-house with just your HR business partners or those that are serving different needs within the organization, you're probably going to fail. It needs to be a cross-functional team, and it needs to meet regularly, and you need to have a mission. But if you can get there, it's the first step in sort of your digital strategy or your data strategy, excuse me.
I like that. And another thing I'll point out here on this slide, and that the animation is going to drive me crazy over time, but the outcome data has been an interesting thing for me on the service provider standpoint, because I found that most of our clients' eyes are bigger than their stomach when it comes to that. I think is one way to say it. So a lot of times we see people have an appetite. Oh, we want to correlate to this, to all sorts of data and things, but that kind of, for whatever reason, they don't have access even internally. Due to some silos, they don't have access to customer experience data, or someone's not letting. Well, why does HR need this or something? But there's some internal limiting factor that keeps them from kind of adding that to the conversation. And so still a journey worth going down, but it's just unfortunate, I think, missed opportunity in a lot of cases.
Yeah, to jump into with data is a lot of times data gets hoarded, but it's not intentional. What happens is you get into these projects, they take longer than you want, and then by the time you're ready to kind of publish findings, it's either old or things have changed. So when adopting data, adopt what's known as instead of a tee to green. So I'm going to use a metaphor for golf. Hopefully everybody understands how the game works. But you tee off and you end on a putting green. Instead of going from it's just thinking about whatever you want on the tee and hope to get to the green. When you use a green to T strategy, you're thinking about, okay, the most important thing I do is deliver actionable insight. So let me make sure that I keep the scope of my project and what I'm trying to deliver manageable enough that I can make sure that I hit that deadline, that I give actionable data in a timely manner so that it can be used, because that's what we're trying to build. We're trying to build muscle memory where we're getting data out, it's being utilized, it's being effective. And if you do that by just having a wish list up front and kind of building this, you'll just get stuck and bogged down and oftentimes delivering things too late. Whereas if you focus on the green and work backwards, like what are the shots I need to do to hit to the green as opposed to just hitting the first shot, you'll actually do much better. So, okay, we want 6-month report out to senior leaders about how our employee population has changed over the last 3 years. Set that as the goal and then work back to what you need to do to accomplish that and hit that goal. Even if the data isn't as robust as you'd want, get something out there.
I like that. I like that a lot. And it's having a goal and some parameters around success for your data efforts, I think is really key. So let's shift gears a bit. Employee experience data for the rest of us. So if we can't go all the way, build out our own. And by the way, not to keep coming back to it, but another challenge to do this work in-house is confidentiality. So, if you'll want, for some of our clients that want to do some of this work internally, we can either partner with them to make sure they have ethical, transparent messaging to their employees around who sees their confidential data. But my preferred style is we'll scrub it before we send it back to them. So they still have the demographic linkages to the perceptions, attitudes, and belief, that employee experience data, but we've taken away any identifying information so that they can get the insights without risk for individuals. But something to consider if you want to do it in-house. There's a confidentiality thing you've got to take very, very serious. Employee experience data for the rest of us. So we might not be able to build that team. Let's talk about some things that we can leverage. Hopefully there's already some things you can leverage. You've got demographic data. You can capture perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs relatively easy. But we're going back to these two questions. What experience are we creating, and is it the right experience? Now, that isn't just a big, broad thing, but it can be applied to any decision you're making around the employee experience. So, for example, return to work has been challenging, and it's always big news when a huge firm drags people back into the office. We're seeing it with some very for big organizations right now, but there's these questions could be asked about that moment. It could be asked about the experience at large, but about individual decisions as well. And that's what we're hopefully painting a picture of here. So I want to talk a little bit about one of our engagement models, because this is another way to measure if we're creating the right experience, even if we don't have all that operational data and the ability to do some in-depth analysis. You can still use these frameworks to get to assess whether you're creating the right experience for your employees. This is a model that we leverage here on our engagement side. We make the distinction between things that drive satisfaction, these base level like expectations. If we're going to the Hertzberg two-factor theory, these are those hygiene factors. And I might even say these are enablement in nature. Can they do the job? Do they, can they be successful here in terms of we've provided them with tools and resources, the basic expectations they need to do the job. Safety, critical, obviously. But are these things in place? Sometimes we talk about being brilliant in the basics around here. Are those foundational needs in place? And then are we going beyond that and doing things that, if I go back to that language I used before, are we inviting people to engage? So that bottom rectangle is around, are we enabling them? And then on the top, are we engaging them? And we use a model here called Engagement Magic that talks about meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. So we can think through each of our decisions, and to the extent you have data on this, are we meeting base level expectations to drive satisfaction? And are we inviting engagement by creating meaning, autonomy, growth, and connection? So that's another way, even if we don't have all the data in the world to assess, are we creating the right experience for our employees? Oh, you're on mute, Matt.
Okay, so the reason this is helpful to talk about is part of being good at data is the final delivery has to be in a way that can be consumed and understand. So models are helpful, whatever you use, whether it's something like this or something else, helping orient the data and putting it into a framework is really important. I think that's the key point we're trying to make. Have a framework so that it's not just not that it's just throwing out interesting tidbits, but they know where it fits within the framework, and then that implies action that should be taken. So if meaning's low, then we can start talking about ways to improve meaning. So anyway,
that's a good point. The framework, and a lot of times it's great for HR, but this is great to teach other leaders to have some kind of framework to say, here's what it looks like when we're getting it right, or here's some questions you can ask yourself to assess if you're getting it right. And speaking of getting it right, this is becoming a core tenet of our beliefs here at DecisionWise in terms of how to get it right with data. Is you've got to get the right data to the right people at the right time. We've seen a lot of examples of people running very strong, very smooth projects to capture employee feedback, and then we're always rushing to say, okay, let's get this executive debrief out, let's get it shared with the population. I've seen companies wait as long as a year to get the results out. And this stuff is got expiration dates on it. It's not valid a year out. It's of limited value a year out. And so you need to get it out not only to the right people, but you've got to get it out pretty promptly while it's fresh and very usable and relevant. Another quote, I snuck one more quote in here. I think I've got at least two more quotes. One person's data is another person's noise. This kind of goes to something Matt has been teaching us about for a long time, which is around the value of curation. So you can't just say, here's all the data we captured and dump it off on a manager's desk and say, good luck. They're going to ignore it, or they'll take it some weird path and kind of be misused. But what we want to do is we want to just say, okay, the data is not enough. We have to understand, well, what matters for this part of the organization or this person needs to be curated and analyzed and then routed to the appropriate people. So we've had a lot of wonderful success with manager reports, but it wasn't until we learned, okay, what does a manager really need to know, that those reports became really useful to say, okay, curating that, pulling it in, and then getting it to them very quickly. Not waiting a year. getting it to them, and then also to Matt's point with some frameworks and interpretation around here's what you can do with this data.
And sometimes we get lost in visualization and in trying to go really deep in our analysis. Um, there's uh, when you uh, when you start in data visualization, the first thing you learn is that literally text or numbers is the first level of data visualization, and that whenever possible, start with that.
Mm.
Your employee engagement score is a more effective way of displaying that data than maybe you in a scatter plot compared to 12 other people. Like that's so there's a hierarchy or kind of an order of data visualization, and your job as a curator is to is to understand that. Don't get overly busy.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'll come back to that term you introduced early in the conversation, data journalism, right? So I think through headlines, how quickly I'm ignoring emails if there's not immediate value. Our managers need to be hit with the information that matters, that can help them do their job and help them address the things that are important to them. And executives as well. That audience has a different need and urgency, and the type of things they need to see are different as well.
and here's an example. Let's say you're conducting exit interviews and you've got 20 different insights. Don't share all 20. Share, these are the top 5 reasons people have excited for leaving. What can you do with this information to stop that?
Right.
Or next time you have a one-on-one, think about folding in these 5 things. We've narrowed it down because every employee has a whirlwind around them. And the whirlwind is all their work and everything that's flowing around them. And we try to pierce the whirlwind. And if we throw tons of stuff out, it just bounces off. But if we throw 1 or 2 things into it, it will get inside and become part of that whirlwind that is the employee.
I like that. I'm going to be saying pierce the whirlwind.
Pierce.
All right. So we've mentioned a few times the need to route this, and Matt used a really great term, like is around don't hoard the information. That's kind of another missed opportunity we see at too many organizations, which is get a lot of wonderful data. We partner with them to help them get some really great information from their employee population, and then HR keeps it to themselves. And even the greatest HR teams in the world cannot change culture by themselves.
Well, and Christian, sometimes we feel like we need to tell them what to do with the data rather than just stopping and giving them the data. There's a great study at Project Oxygen, which was done to study managers at Google. And a phrase that has stuck with me was, I'm smart, just give me the data and I'll decide. But we try to be helpful, and that's just kind of who we are as HR leaders. So not only do we want to give them the data, but then we want to say, and you need to do this and this and this. Stop. They're smart people. Give them the data and trust that they can, if it's the right data, they're going to take action on it. So anyway, sometimes I think that's what slows us down is we think, well, I can't just give them the data. I've got to come in with 12 recommendations and a 5-step plan.
I love that. It's a good point. And we've gone on our own journey with prescriptive recommendations, and we have that built in as a core component of our technology. But we don't use it in place of, and forget that, hey, managers were chosen to lead for a reason, and we need to get this in their hands as quickly and as efficiently as possible and give them the best chance to take meaningful action on it. In fact, a lot of the ways we measure organizational readiness for driving the employee experience is around who owns the employee experience. If it's only HR, then they're in kind of your infancy. If senior leaders are buying in, if managers and teams are recognizing their stewardship or their ownership of their component of the employee experience, that's a more advanced, ready organization. A lot of it's not, our work isn't just helping companies measure the employee experience. It's also helping them expand ownership of the employee experience, because more is possible when we get more of these key stakeholders included. In fact, that's what this slide is on. The three.
I was just going to follow up with a little story. there's a metaphor of the stone cutter, right? The stone cutters might hammer a stone for 100 times before it splits. And the questions always arise, well, was it the last blow that cut the stone, or was it the 22nd? Right? And I think sometimes with data, it's a little like being a stone cutter. Get it out there and keep giving it to them. Because if we say, oh, the data says you need to hold more one-on-ones, and here's all of these great programs how to hold one-on-ones, and we don't see the one-on-ones go up, don't stop giving the data. Instead of focusing on maybe all the time trying to teach them how to have one-on-ones, just continue to tell them you're not having enough one-on-ones, you're not having enough one-on-ones, and eventually on the 100th time the stone will be cut. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that's a great metaphor. I've heard um, something similar around bamboo, but the idea though is, don't underestimate your managers, but also don't overestimate the number of times they need to hear a message. Might be the other way to say it. I kind of want to just, I'll kind of go through these slides quickly, but as far as data is considered, and I'll go back to this idea of culture. Every day, every human being at your organization co-creates what it feels like to work there. But if we're trying to craft information for every single employee and a unique message, we're not going to get anything done. The three key groups I've learned to focus on are senior leaders, HR, and managers and teams. And if you can simplify your approach to just think through those leaders, especially around employee experience data, okay, what are the implications for senior leaders? What are the implications for HR? What are the implications for individual managers and teams? That will make this work a lot easier for you. There's certain things that only the executive team can influence. Mission, vision, or the organization, strategy and goals, policy decisions. There's things that happen at the top that really matter. If I had more time, I'd tell you more about, we have items around optimism for the future or belief in the strategy. And if employees don't believe in the strategy, then my question to executives are, do you believe in the strategy? Do you have a strategy? Why? Where's that breaking down? And if they don't, then that's something that frontline employees can't fill that gap in. The manager can't do it. HR can't. There's jobs that have to be accomplished there. And employee experience data needs to be filtered and curated for them. HR owns what I would call people systems or organizational structures. There are a lot of things, including the keepers of the EX process and stewardship there, but influencing and shaping the employee experience should be diffused across these groups. But there are certain things like L&D programs, organizational design, communication systems. A lot of things sit with HR. And so they own a component. Some of that employee experience data does rest with them, and the onus for action rests with them. But a lot of it goes to this last category. The managers are the closest to the frontline employee experience and the experience of all of us. They're so influenced by the manager, and not just the individual team experience, but also what we call writing for the brand. We have a lot of research that indicates that one of the most important things a manager can do is positively represent the organization to their employees. And if they're just building loyalty to them or the team unit, they're doing them a disservice. It's a false kindness. It's a short-term thinking. And so we want to give them the information that helps them shape the experience on their team, but we also want to help them understand their role in shaping their team's view of the organization. And employee data or the data we're talking about can really help build some urgency and some specific action around that.
Yeah, Christian, I just really think that this point is so valuable that you bring up, which is make sure you're curating your data for these three groups. And don't, it's tempting to have 12 groups, it's tempting to have one. This is what we think is the optimal. And this is really your thinking, and our data suggests that it's absolutely right. This is the best way to think about it. So now as you sit down, you're like, okay, what is it that I need to get to managers? What is it that we need to understand as an HR team? And then make sure we're getting senior leaders the trends that we think we're seeing so that they can think more strategically. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you focus just on in this little ecosystem that you have.
Yeah, it's proven to be very helpful for me. I get overwhelmed if I think through, okay, we've got a company of 20,000 people here, or even a smaller company, like 100 people, you can get overwhelmed about who needs to know what. But if you simplify to these three groups and understand their spheres of influence, then you can cut right to it. So I want to kind of get back to we've covered a lot of ground around going deep with data, and also some maybe a lighter touch to how to answer these two questions. What experience are we creating, and is it the right experience? In closing, and we'll pause for a moment, or we'll have questions here in a moment. I hope we'll see if that chat function's working. Ask what experience are we creating, and if you're not measuring, get started. Do an engagement survey. Consider life cycle surveys. Consider looking at Chronos and Kairos moments. Tapping in and understanding, okay, are we creating the right experience there? Excuse me, are you creating the right experience? So measure the experience, then assess if it's the right experience. Are you meeting basic expectations? Are you getting those satisfaction areas right? Are you creating magic or purpose path in place? Consider tying it to operational data if you've got some of that. Don't hoard the data. This is a point that Matt has made, and I've found it to be so true. Get it out to the people that can shape the employee experience. Consider those three groups. Get it out. Don't just keep it to yourselves, and really work at not only expanding the ownership and the employee experience, but also building a mindset of data literacy and an appreciation for when we get employee experience data. It's a gift that can help us not only sometimes people discount this as a touchy-feely exercise, but this is as strategic as it gets. The experience we create directly influences the outcomes we get. And that can be engagement and turnover and things that are kind of relegated to HR, but it also is our customer experience. It's the extent that we're able to accomplish the strategy executives have put forth. So there's a lot of value to this. I do love this quote. We've come to it often, and especially as it goes to the employee experience. But I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. One of the greatest quotes, I think, around any kind of experience design, and important for this. And if you don't believe me or believe this quote, go look at Glassdoor and see if people have long memories for how they felt about their workplace experience. Matt, before we jump to questions, anything you'd add?
Yeah, that our goal with data is at the end of the day, like you said, if manager's job is to organize the work and accomplish the work of the organization, the only way they can do that is through others. And the only way you get others to buy in is the experience that they work within. And so experience management for our leader is just as important of a function as it is organizing the work itself.
I love that.
It is, and that's all. And that's why data is important, because it's now half their job. We've got to give them the data they need.
I love that. I love that. We have a question. It's a good question. In the organizations you support, do you see employee experience committees that have active involvement on influencing experience and engagement? How would you recommend constructing an experience committee with leadership buy-in? So that is a really good question, and I've seen it done various ways, but oftentimes there'll be like an employee engagement committee or something. Sometimes that's formed in advance. Sometimes that's who suggests they run a survey and how we get involved. More often I see it as an after effect where it's, hey, we ran a survey, we want a team of change agents or people to kind of help move this forward. Here's some challenges with that. And Logan asked it the right way. You need executive buy-in. They need someone with some positional influence and power to help make things happen. And ideally, it's outside of HR, because it's great if you can bring in the COO or something like that, or CEO to sit in a committee. But making sure you've got enough gravity assigned or aligned with that group is important. Another thing I see is training. In fact, we're going down the path of building an employee experience certification for this exact reason, because we do see a lot of value in having kind of these fire tenders or people that are internal owners of the employee experience and represent that as subject matter experts in the org. But a lot of times if they don't have some kind of training, and sorry to talk over Matt, just if I could finish the thought, if they don't have a lot of training, they'll ask for some strange things and can actually set the work back. But a little bit of training and expertise can go a long ways there.
I just want to reemphasize the point. If you have committees whose job is to come up with solutions to the experience problems, that's not going to work because the solutions are found at the leader level, at the manager level. So so if the committees are there to support and train and guide and teach the leader driven experience, that experience at the direct level, then it works beautifully. And that's why what Christian was talking about is if we teach them how, then they can go do it because they're ultimately the ones that have to find the solutions that work. So
Yeah.
committees that are tasked with solution building don't work. Committees that tasked with support for operational leaders at that key level, those work really well.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I know we're at time, but I know Matt and I have a moment or two. If there's other questions, don't want to shortchange the conversation. Feel free to put those in the chat. Otherwise, I should have mentioned at the outset that this session does qualify for 1 credit of HRCI or insurance credit. So a link to claim that credit will be sent out after the session concludes, and make sure everyone gets credit for being here today. And then the other thing I'll say is if you do have additional questions or want to connect after the fact, you can reach us at info@decisionwise.com. Hopefully, again, you can tell that we're very passionate about this work. Even if you're not a client or even a prospect of us, we love to just be thought partners and discuss possible solutions. So feel free to reach out as well. I'll put in a plug for our newsletter that comes out monthly and has a lot of value in it as well. So if there are no other questions, I want to thank Matt for joining me in this conversation and everyone else for attending. If you want to send a note, Lauren sent a quick question. If you want to just ping us at info@DecisionWise, we can get you the slide deck if you're interested in that. Hopefully we added some value and expanded some of your toolkit for thinking with data-driven decisions. Thanks, everyone.